Arrow, Part 4. Arrow blinks. She's been waiting for a long time. She slept well, didn't wake even once during the night. There's one sound she's been listening for, and it's here. Footsteps echo in the hall outside her door, heavy boots coming in up the stairs. They're making an effort to be quiet, but the stairwell isn't helping, its acoustics unaccommodating to the aims of men requiring stealth. Arrow opens her eyes. It's still early in the morning, not quite 7 o'clock. It's been 10 days since she walked away from Hassan on the 14th floor of the Parliament building, 10 days since she deserted Eden Karaman's unit of murderers. This is the first night she slept in her apartment since then, and already they've found her. She's a little surprised. She didn't imagine they'd be so efficient. Her father's gun is on the bedside table beside her. It's loaded and ready, but her hand stays at her side under her pile of blankets. She wonders what the weather will be like today. Yesterday it seemed like it might rain, but there's never any way to tell what will happen the next day until it comes. She hopes it rains. The city could use the water. They've been hunting her for 10 days now, and they've found her because she has allowed them to. They knew where she was all along, knew she was in one of the buildings above the cellist, but they couldn't find her no matter how many times they looked. Twice, she had Eden Carmen's head in her sights, but she never pulled the trigger. She hasn't fired her rifle since killing the sniper the men on the hill sent for the cellist, but she would have, if necessary, and she believes her presence kept him alive. He played for 22 days, just as he said he would. Every day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, regardless of how much fighting was going on around him. Some days he had an audience. Other days there was so much shelling that no one in their right mind would linger in the street. It didn't appear to make any difference to him. He always played exactly the same way. The only variation in his routine was on the last day. She lay concealed in her hiding spot, invisible. She felt him enter the street, but before he began to play, she knew no one was going to shoot him. The men on the hills had given up. Her hands relaxed and her finger fell from the trigger. As the cellist began to play, she looked down at the street. It was full of people. No one moved. They all stood motionless, and though it was clear to her that they were listening intently, it also seemed as though they weren't entirely there. Errol let the slow pulse of the vibrating strings flood into her. She felt the lament raise a lump in her throat, fought back tears. She inhaled sharp and fast. Her eyes watered, and the notes ascended the scale. The men on the hills, the men in the city, herself, none of them had the right to do the things they'd done. It had never happened. It could never have happened. But she knew these notes. They had become a part of her. They told her that everything had happened exactly as she knew it had, and that nothing could be done about it. No grief or rage or noble act could undo it. But it could all have been stopped. It was possible. The men on the hills didn't have to be murderers. The men in the city didn't have to lower themselves to fight their attackers. She didn't have to be filled with hatred. The music demanded that she remember this, that she know to a certainty that the world still held the capacity for goodness. The notes were proof of that. Arrow closed her eyes, and when she opened them, the music was over. In the street, the cellist sat on his stool for a very long time. He was crying. His head leaned forward, and a few strands of inky hair fell across his brow. One hand moved to cover his face, while the other cradled the body of the cello. After a while, he stood up, and he walked over to the pile of flowers that had been steadily growing since the day the mortar fell. He looked at it for a while and then dropped his bow into the pile. No one on the street moved. They held their breath, waiting for him to say something, but the cellist didn't speak. There was nothing left for him to say. He turned, picked up his stool, and went through the door to his apartment without looking back at the street. Slowly, people began to move, and one by one they left the street to return to their lives. The footsteps are at the top of the stair now, just outside her door. Errol looks again at the gun on her night table. If she were to use it, she knows exactly what would happen. The men on the other side of the door would die. Every one of them would die, and she would step over their bodies and out into the street. It would only take a few seconds. It would be the easiest thing in the world. But she isn't going to pick up the gun. It sits on the night table, partly out of habit and partly because she wants them to know that she was armed and could have fought back. She's not sure they'll notice this clue. It doesn't matter. It matters only that she leaves it. She wonders what her life might have been like if there had been no war, if the men on the hills hadn't decided that they need to be reviled, or that the answer to their aspirations of victimhood lay in guns and tanks and grenades. Maybe she'd have gotten married. Maybe she'd gone on to graduate school, had a good job, lived in a nice apartment, and gone to the theater in the evenings with her friends. There could have been children. She likes children, or she used to. The possibilities were endless. The possibilities now, however, are at an end. If she picks up the gun and kills the men on the other side of the door, she will become a fugitive, and sooner or later she will either have to kill again or she will be caught. In the meantime, necessity will force her to hate her pursuers. And Arrow will not let that happen. Whether they are on the hills or in the city, no one will tell her who to hate. After the Cellist disappeared, Arrow went down into the street, not caring whether anyone saw her. She looked at the cobblestones, the shattered windows, and the pile of flowers. She didn't think of anything, couldn't think of anything she hadn't already gone over 1,000 times. So she just stood there. The cellist wouldn't be back tomorrow. There would be no more concerts in the street. She was disappointed it was over. Arrow leaned down and placed her rifle beside the cellist's bow. In a few seconds, the door will open. At least 4 men, maybe more, will burst through, and as quickly as they can, they will fire as many bullets into her as possible. It won't take long, only a few seconds, and afterwards, they will feel sheepish at how nervous they were about the whole thing. She hears one of them take a step back, knows he's about to kick in the door. She closes her eyes, recalls the notes she heard only yesterday, a melody that is no longer there but feels very close. Her lips move, and a moment before the door splinters off of its hinges, she says, her voice strong and quiet, "My name is Alyssa."